the chat up on my phone. Yeah, I haven't actually. We're waiting for it to go live before I do it. But
okay,
so just come to that. Thank you.
I was watching Ben's posts earlier on his Facebook page that they were having problems with YouTube.
Well,
but we're up and live, so we've got a few guys here. We've got Arvin. G'day, Arvin. Mr. BHP, which is Bruce. And
good morning, Bruce and Arvin. How you doing?
Bruce. And Sean Zinnerman. G'day, Sean. And Jimmy T. G'day, Jimmy T. It's always good to see Jimmy. Jimmy's from Aussie.
Jimmy T, how you doing? Good morning. Very early morning for me.
So, most of the people in the chat are regulars, so we all know each other. So, obviously, Carl and I are from New Zealand.
Sure.
It's early morning, 5:30 for Simon. So we're really happy that Simon's decided to jump out of bed about 3 hours earlier than normal.
If only it were.
to talk about one of his favourite topics, and the topic we want to have a chat about, and you guys can join us in the chat, obviously, is Led Zeppelin. So,
the mighty Led Zeppelin.
Yeah. Carl sort of mentioned the idea if we can elaborate a little bit more about the relationship between the Yardbirds and the foundation, the setting up of Led Zeppelin, if that's okay.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's really interesting, that bit, isn't it? There's some funny things in there as well. But yeah, but that sounds like a good idea. And I think that the background, particularly of Jimmy Page and John Paul Jones, is really interesting as well, because of their background and what they did in the early mid-60s.
Session work.
Yeah, all that session work and obviously crossing over with each other and who they played with and what they did and their formative years as musicians, particularly from our point of view as guitarists with Jimmy Page. As a kind of how he did it.
I think the thing for me, Simon and Carl, with Led Zeppelin, obviously, when if you have an interest in British blues, you come across the Yardbirds. They were just bubbling under the Rolling Stones. They had a couple of great guitarists who went on to become giants. But there were a couple of other interesting guys in that band that didn't do much. I suppose the real stars clearly were Page and who was the other guy? Jeff Beck.
Jeff Beck, and of course Eric Clapton before Jeff Beck. They had them all passing through their doors, didn't they? The Yardbirds. I mean, it started with. And that's interesting in itself, that dynamic. And obviously the Yardbirds, when they ended up with Page and Beck on this, both playing guitar, because Page joined as bass player when I think Paul Samuel Smith left and for a bit, and then they got another bass player and he joined. So they had twin guitars for a bit. I'm not quite probably didn't suit Jeff Beck, but he's that type. But I know they tried to form Led Zeppelin with Jeff Beck and Moon and Entwistle as well. It's kind of super group kind of thing. And they started off trying to do that. So I think there's an interesting dynamic in sort of lead guitars and guitarists through the Yardbirds. I mean, all those three of the greatest British guitarists ever, passing through through them, each going off and doing something else.
Eric Clapton. I don't know a lot about Led Zeppelin, other than some of the stuff that I've listened to, and I got this book a couple of years ago, Clapton, Beck, and Page, and
there we are,
and as you said, they were three Yardbirds.
Absolutely.
So again, a little bit like John Mayall, I suppose. Interesting band because it was a school, a nursery, a school, a university for guys to develop a passion for their music and go on and do other things.
That's right. Them and obviously so John Mayall's Blues Breakers as well. Same kind of thing, didn't it? All those guys passed through John Mayall's Blues Breakers and kind of went on to do other stuff. Eric Clapton, Peter Green, they all went off and then did their own things as kind of, so right, as a kind of sort of schooling in that, where those slightly older guys, Alexis Corner, obviously, is another person who appears in that kind of people who passed through his band sort of thing, Mick Taylor. And those guys from, and I think there's very much that kind of, that slightly older generation of, bringing the young guys in, and then the young guys are there for a year or whatever, and then they go off and do their own thing. I think that certainly most of those. I think Page is a bit different, but because of all the, the session work and what he did before the Yardbirds and things. I mean, I think he joined the Yardbirds in slightly different circumstances to the others when they were kind of falling apart and joining as a bass player.
Do you know much about the session work, Carl, that Page did beforehand?
Oh, he just got led to believe roped into doing all manner of things, especially lots of guitar solos, and especially did a lot of work for a lot of the bubblegum British bands that didn't have the chops. I mean, obviously they were, in a way, talented bands in the sense they could write a pop song, but they couldn't deliver a great rock solo. So hence Jimmy Page. And I think his frailness and sickness was actually a blessing in disguise, because he got really quite good at playing a lot of different styles, because part of his job was, hey, we need a rock single, a Scotty Moore style solo on this pop song, or we need a jazzy kind of solo on this little novelty hit, or he might have been doing commercials and ads, all manner of things. But it was great in the sense that also he would have crossed paths with John Paul Jones, who was a similar kind of a guy. And so later on down the road, when they became the new Yardbirds, which formed into Led Zeppelin, John Paul Jones and Jimmy Page already had a relationship through the session work.
And do you think that was important? We've made that connection a few times in our discussions about the Stones, about a band being really important, having that dynamic. So that must have been important for Jimmy, because he had big plans, didn't he? He was going to do something, clearly. And having John Paul Jones, obviously he was a friend, a colleague. So that was important.
Yeah, that's right.
On that song, "She's a Rainbow," if you read the liner notes, strings arranged by John Paul Jones. These are clever guys, young guys from the School of Art, and just multi-instrumentalists. Watch some of those Led Zeppelin videos. It's no problem for John Paul Jones to switch from bass to keyboards to mandolin.
Wasn't one of that was one of their things, wasn't it? That they said, well, if we need another instrument on our track, John Paul Jones just played it, so because he could play everything. So we didn't bother getting anybody else in. We just said to him, "Go and play that." He just went off and played it, like the recorder on Stairway to Heaven and all of that stuff. That's all him, and all the Mellotron, all the keyboard stuff. It's all him, and he just, if we need an instrument, John to just play it. That'll be fine. Which I think is really cool.
I can't recall just at the moment, Simon and Carl, but a good friend of mine recently said that some of the best producers have been bass players, because it's by virtue of the fact when you're a bass player, you have to listen to other instruments in the band, and you attune yourself to that. If you're a lead guitarist, you're only listening to what you're doing, If you're a drummer, you're counting, and if you're a singer, but apparently a bass player, and I haven't played bass in a band, but you're listening to other instruments, so there must be something to that argument.
I think you're the glue between between the drums and then what the guitarist is doing. I think that what the bass player does is he gives the bass drum a tune. So in effect, what he plays follows the bass drum, but you're giving it, obviously you're playing strings, so you're giving it a tune, and that tune then links to what the guitarist is playing. So they're the glue that takes just that, drums, which is fairly flat and monotone, and gives that a tune that fits with the guitarist. So I think that, I think you're absolutely right. You've got to listen to both sides of it. You were listening to the guitar player, what he's doing, and you're listening to what the drummer's doing and playing along with him, and trying to be, completely integrated with what the drummer does.
Hey, I've got a question, and I haven't found the answer to it. Did Jimmy Page want to start a band like Led Zeppelin? Was he sussing out a band because he wanted to be creative and get some music out? Or did he want to create a band because he realized where rock and roll was going, that he could make a hell of a lot of money?
Go on, Carl, take it.
What little I know is that obviously, and we've got Jeff Beck to thank a lot for this, because Jeff Beck had the telly. He was doing some of those Eastern sounds with Heart Full of Soul and Happening 10 years ago, and there was they were really influenced by the San Francisco psychedelic sound, 67.
Who Page was?
Page and Beck, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Because as we know, with the famous song, and I was talking to Jimmy Page the other day, and I said, I'm watching YouTube. And he goes, you stay away from that channel. I said, what do you mean, Jim? And he says, because it's made me out to be a liar. Because, a lot of those songs, Dazed and Confused, and there was a lot of stuff that he would have seen on those Yardbirds tours, 67 and 68.
Yeah.
From the American folk scene in San Francisco, that he was like, wow, we could take this to another direction. So I think Jimmy Page was wanting to take they're going to be called the New Yardbirds, into a rock, psychedelic, folky Joan Baez direction. And the other guys weren't really interested, because I just don't think that rhythm section had the chops anyway.
Who Ninja in the chat saying he wanted chicks. That was another reason why he started the band.
He wanted chicks. I think he did. I think he got fed up with playing sessions and, playing on hundreds of sessions, playing music and all of that, and decided that he'd, maybe he'd start his own thing. And I think that pretty soon after that, he decided to quit his session. He got into the Yardbirds, as the bass player, as a kind of bit of fate intervening kind of thing. But I agree entirely. I think he was looking for that opportunity, having done 5 or 6 years of sessions and all of those things, playing on the Kinks and the Who and early Kinks and Who songs. Can't explain his rhythm guitarist Jimmy Page.
Even a rumour he did a couple of solos on some early Stones, Heart of Stone and that, but it's not been confirmed.
No, I don't think it's been confirmed by him either, is it? It's
and
even I think he did something later, but
even Beggars Banquets, it's all nothing's actually. It's just
I don't know. Maybe a bit of but I mean, as he said himself, I played on so many sessions, I've no idea what I played on really.
Yeah.
If you're doing 3 or 4 sessions a day, 15 a week, how in God's name do you remember what on earth you did? You turn up and probably you turn up in a studio, not everybody's there, maybe just the the engineers there, and you go and overdub something, do something. But what's interesting about,
I think the foundations of where Jimmy wanted to go was already there, with the train kept a rolling, and that what they call that freak out music. But he just wanted to take it to another level of experimentation and skill set. He was just a very talented guy.
Yeah, interesting, isn't he? How he developed. I mean, have you seen that early clip of him playing skiffle from 1958?
Yeah.
And that's in England. That's a really interesting kind of. It's a bit like, I don't know how much you know about skiffle, guys, but skiffle was a bit like punk, in that it's really, you could learn, Lonnie Donegan obviously is the famous, skiffle guy. And they started doing skiffle. They had, jazz bands, playing trad jazz. And in the intervals, they would start doing this sort of skiffle thing to keep the audience interested. And it was really simple. Obviously, T-chest bass and all of that. And, so it's acoustic guitar, washboard to play. And
CCR.
so, yeah. And basically, it was really simple. So, like, when you were at school, what you learned was skiffle, because once you learned 2 or 3 chords, you could play Rock Island Line, you could play whatever, the Lonnie Donegan set, and it's really easy to do. So it's really easy to get in, a bit like punk, when 3 chords, da 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 da, kind of thing.
Yep.
A bit more overdrive.
That's where the Beatles cut their teeth.
Yeah,
That's
yeah,
right.
absolutely. Yeah, the Quarrymen were a skiffle band, and I think it's kind of underestimated the importance of that movement in that whole generation of guitar players. Page, Beck, Clapton certainly played skiffle when he was especially in that kind of early sort of 12, 13, 14, early teenage years, when you were at school kind of thing, doing stuff at school. And that's where where he learned his chops, and that kind of where he's on the telly with playing the skiffle band. I think that was really important in getting him into it and getting him started in playing. Because it's simple. And obviously in those days, no YouTube, no 75 people to show you how to play something. You either have to go and listen to it 100 times and slow it down to 16 or whatever on your record player, or you're learning it like that. But you've got to have an in that is reasonably simple, in my book, to play. And I think skiffle was that thing for him. And then obviously the American equivalent of skiffle is rock and roll, of course, which isn't that difficult to play. Scotty Moore, Buddy Holly, of course. Is the great kind of not massive solos. Peggy Sue's got just a rhythm guitar solo, basically. Turn it up a bit, change the pickup, kind of thing. And I think that that gives people an in. And then he went off and started, obviously learned a bit more, played a bit more, and got into that kind of session work because he could.
Oh, absolutely, Simon. I think that's the great thing of what skiffle did. It gave a gang of guys something to do other than, say, kick a football around. It gave them something creative to do.
The nerds.
And you had to play in front of people at a young age. And if you were good, you probably, got paid for it, or you got a bit of attention, which is, what Clapton liked. It was the first time he could do something where people actually looked and thought, this guy's pretty good. Same thing with Lennon. And obviously the same thing with Jimmy Page. They realised, heck, actually, I'm pretty good at this. This is good.
Yeah, you can get somewhere quickly, can't you? You learn 2 or 3 chords. You can learn a song. You can learn 10 songs. Ooh, I could play a song. Yeah, because the classic thing with I've said this before. Classic thing with you say, I play the guitar. What's the first thing people say to you? Give us a song, then. So you've got to have something to play.
So where did Jimmy Page learn the blues? What was it? His exposure and being part of the Yardbirds, where he would have listened and absorbed the blues? Would it have been in that band, or earlier when he was doing his session work?
I think it's earlier than that. I think it goes back to his, Scotty Moore, Elvis. These guys are his heroes, kind of thing. So he approached it from that kind of rock and roll angle, really. But yeah, no, much younger than that. And obviously, that kind of mid-60s things where American blues artists were coming to the UK. He must have seen them and, been interested in them. Obviously, him, Clapton, Beck, all playing. He must have seen the Blues Breakers and all of that stuff.
Because
so that it was around.
That first album is pretty phenomenal.
Yeah, but none of it's originals, of course.
No.
As a side note, do you know? I've just found this out. I was mucking around, and do you know why? Do you know why they had to change? Do you know why they changed the name from the New Yardbirds? because Paul Samwell Smith, this is the time Led Zeppelin, Paul Samwell Smith issued a cease and desist notice to them to say they couldn't be called the Yardbirds. They had to change their, well, they could be for the Scandinavian tour, but they couldn't be for anything else. I think it's quite amusing, isn't it? You can't be
He
called the
actually did them
Yardbirds.
probably a favour. Yeah.
Yeah. Is that like funny? They issued them with a cease and desist notice. You're not allowed to call yourself the Yardbirds. You have to do something else. But this is quite. I think that's really good. So they were allowed to do that.
I love that first album though, Simon. I know it's covers, but yeah, you know,
they bring their own thing to it. I mean, you know, I play in a covers band. I kind of get this, you know, that the whole art of being a covers band is what you bring to those songs yourself. You know, when you play them, what are you doing yourself? You know, and let's be fair, they're blues songs. You know, everybody's playing their own version of those songs. You know, all those American blues guys are playing their own version of those songs. So the fact that, you know, Led Zeppelin's got their own version of those songs, they bring their own slant, their own sound, their own take on them completely. You know, I think it's completely valid, that as a way in. You know, if you're recording, you know, you want to get started, you want to, you know, then what better way than to take songs that are already written. You know, they recorded their first album in, you know, 9 days, I think, and you know, knocked it off, paid for it themselves.
Well, the good thing about that album is that when you look at that black and white footage where they've been filmed, is it in Denmark?
Yeah. I'd like to introduce Led Zeppelin to you, and that's Robert Plant doing that, yeah?
Yes.
Yeah.
Boy, you know, that they sound just like the record. So that's capturing that band at that specific period in time really well. There's no bullcrap going on there. There's no rubbish. That's the band. Yeah, that's what I love about it.
But I think that's the way they record. I mean, they recorded all those. You know, they got in a room. You know, 4 of them, put some baffles up between the instruments. You know, but all those basic tracks are all done together. You count them off, 1, 2, 3, 4. Off you go. You know.
You know much about that first album, Carl, as far as how they recorded it?
No, not at all. I just know that the key to their sound is that John Bonham really was a lot of the rock to their sound. He was a heavy drummer. We know that I found out later on that Jimmy was still had attached to the Yardbirds in the sense he carried over his Telecaster.
Yep.
And Robert Plant just gave them a different dimension. I mean, Keith Ralph was a pretty good singer, but Robert Plant just had that range. He could go from blues to rock to folk to traditional songs. Just a fantastic singer. Also want to mention too, I didn't know this till today, just doing a bit of homework, but when Andrew mentioned the word money, I think the better word would be that they became quite disciplined and quite a business in the sense that Peter Grant was managing
absolutely
the last part of the Yardbirds, and then he carried on over to Led Zeppelin.
So he was with them from the start.
No, yeah. I don't think from the start, from about 1967.
Cat interfering in life.
Yeah. I think the last 2 years of the Yardbirds, Peter Grant got involved, and I think he helped organise the American tours. And those American tours would have really opened their eyes to the Led Zeppelin sound because of the exposure, because they would have seen where the music direction was going.
So what do you think was the defining key to that first album? What was it, the vocals or the drumming? Because that drumming was unique.
I think just that the blues played heavy, and just no apologies. Jimmy Page made it quite clear from day one and from formation to the end of Led Zeppelin, he was in control. He was the mastermind. So
that was his band, wasn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah, he's the keeper of the flame, isn't he, of Led Zeppelin? And I think that the other thing, Carl, following on from your point, is that he'd spent the last 6 years in studios. He understood how to record, quickly, how to record, get really good sounds, so that, and he understood all of that. And I think that's, as a kind of guitarist producer, and that's not, he always was really, production. So he understood about how to get those sounds, how to organize the band, and obviously with Peter Grant, for me, the interesting thing about that first album is they recorded it themselves. They paid for it all themselves.
Did not know that.
So they started off, once they recorded it, they went off to record companies and said, "We've got an album." And, so they went to Atlantic in America. I think they got $150,000, that kind of thing. And as an advance, but they'd already recorded it, which is, finished.
Wow. And it's a classic to this day as far as for vinyl collectors. It was relatively unknown, and then it just took off. Because once the Americans got a hold of it, it was over. It was like, wow.
Well, they did, Carl, I was doing some research as well. They did 4 American tours in 1968.
Really?
The Yardbirds?
4. They did 4 American. Yeah, well, Led Zeppelin. They recorded in from December '68 to
wow.
they did 4 American tours and 4 UK tours, and released Led Zeppelin 2 in 1 year.
Led Zeppelin 2 is an absolute.
So they go to America. Yeah, so they go to America for 6 weeks and play, and then they come out and they do. They started off supporting people like Vanilla Fudge and Iron Butterfly, in the Gada Davida and all of that, and then they started blowing them away and things. So they ended up just going on their own. But imagine that they go for 6 weeks, tour, come back, have a couple of weeks off, do a UK tour, go back to America, do another tour, come back to the UK, record. They
were smart enough, Simon. They were smart enough, obviously, to understand. They probably were looking at the Stones. They realised that the Stones were making money by touring. That was certainly how a lot of bands made money, didn't they?
It's the way you broke, is to go touring. And they obviously realised that America was, the big market. So you go over and you tour. And they had something new. They had something different. They started off and, as I say, started off supporting people and stuff. So they obviously went to, reasonable sized venues from the start. I don't think they started off playing clubs, but feel support. But yeah, if you've got that sound, those guys, you're a powerful band, and there are some very funny stories I saw on one of their first tours. They played at the Boston Tea Party in Boston, and they played 4 hours on the back of having 1 album out. They played the whole set twice, and then they played a covers set as well, just so they could keep going.
Is that because the people were digging what they were doing?
Mm.
Yeah,
but
there's
it's just really funny. No support acts. Well, I love the idea. We'll just go around again. We've played our 10 songs that we've got. That's before they got into the kind of really into the forest. But we'll just go around again. It's fine.
and Jimmy Page was quite clever because he introduced a little bit of theatrics to the show with the bow and the Dazed and the Confused.
Yeah.
So it was, with the psychedelia and the improv and the extended solos, it wasn't uncommon for songs to be 7-8 minutes, and he kept that tradition going.
Yeah, completely. He got that. He got the bow thing from, I can't remember the name of the band. Oh, it'll come to me anyway. They had there's a complete sideline, but the band where the guy did the bow, I think they had a hit with a song called Painter Man. Well, they had a song called Painter Man, which was later covered by Boney M. It's amazing how these things come round. There's kind of odd things. But yeah, you're absolutely right. That's kind of theatrics, extended solos to extend your set out after all.
True.
And that stuff about, when they used to insert other songs into, like, Dazed and Confused, they go off and do Everly Brothers and all those other things, to make those songs longer. Yeah, clever way of doing it without having to learn too much.
I read a story when in those early days of those tours that the PA or Robert Plant's mic blew, and he did a whole set.
Just singing.
He's singing, no microphone, yeah. So,
yes, that's interesting. Yeah, so it can't have been that loud. Or he was really loud.
But yeah, I remember a friend of mine, neighbour, was a big Zeppelin guy, and he had a bootleg of them live in France. And no joke, you put the CD on, and the recording was so precise, it felt like Led Zeppelin was in the room. I don't know who set up the mics or whatever, but I think Led Zeppelin had an amazing live sound too. They knew what they were doing, like you were saying, with the session work and mic placement, guitar volume and tone, and John Paul Jones being having a very acute ear, and
clever.
It was almost
a lot
like
of knowledge in there.
Bonham was Bonham got the job because he was Jimmy's mate. Even though he was a good drummer, he was pretty loud.
Well, Robert Plant's mate.
Oh, was it? Okay.
Yeah, Robert Plant. Yeah, him and Robert Plant had been in bands in the Midlands playing. And when Jimmy Page saw in the Yardbirds, he asked a guy called Terry Reid, an English singer, really great singer, Terry Reid, who turned him down and said, no. But he said, I've seen this guy, Robert Plant, go and check him out. And so they went and checked him out. And obviously Robert Plant had played with John Bonham and thought he was great. And there is a funny story about that when they wanted John Bonham to join, they had immense difficulty getting hold of him because he didn't have a phone. Because in those days, no mobile phones or anything. You've got to phone somebody up on their landline, if they had one.
So no texting, no emails, no phone.
No, none of that. No.
Plus, he used to like to drink, so that would have been made it even more difficult.
Down the pub, sir. Yes. How'd you get hold of him down the pub? Ring up the local King's Arms and say, John there. My name's Peter Grant. Yes.
You want a job?
Yeah, do you want a job? I've got a job for you in London, with a bloke called what? Difficult to believe, really, isn't it? I love that idea. I love those kind of pre-technology days when it was like really difficult, the difficulty of getting hold of people. Imagine if he hadn't got somebody else. Can't get hold of him. Get somebody else.
So what do you guys think about the argument? And bear in mind, I'm not saying this. I'm just repeating what I've heard other guys say. So this is not my view. That Jimmy Page wasn't that much of a standout of a guitarist on that first album. He was just, a good guitar player. It wasn't until Led Zeppelin 2 came along where he became the guitarist that we all know him to be. Do you guys agree with that argument, or do you have holes with that argument?
I own the second album, and it's a masterpiece. The first album was very much, I would almost say pub rock. It definitely was. It wasn't primitive, but it was very ACD-ish in a way that was very raw and primal. Maybe that was their introduction. Maybe they had a lot of stuff up their sleeve that they wanted later to put out. That was like, this is who we are, and they basically busted the doors down open.
Because he played his 59 Les Paul, obviously, on Whole Lot of Love, and that was the song that blew, I think, a lot of people away, wasn't it? Hearing that song, in 1969, it certainly blew a lot of critics away. So, but what's interesting, though, is that he was playing a Les Paul Custom back in the Yardbirds. But why was he playing a Telecaster on the first album? Why did he go back to a Telecaster?
Was he playing Les Paul's? I don't think he was. My impression was that it seemingly his main instrument through most of those 60s was a telly.
No.
Not. Did he go?
In this interview here in 1977, he's talking Simon about how he had a custom, and he played it, but he doesn't answer.
Okay.
He doesn't say why he went back to the tally.
No. And I mean, I wonder if actually the telly was his main instrument, the one he felt, So when he went to do the first Zeppelin record, and going back to the point you were making just now, Carl, about, you're right. If you record an album in 9 days, it's going to be quite raw, quite kind of upfront. It's going to be a representation of your live sound, especially if you're doing live.
And the telly's a good live cutting
good
raw
live instrument, a real workhorse guitar. And seemingly didn't start using them until sort of halfway through '69. He kind of got some Les Paul and some Marshalls and kind of started it then. But which would be around about the time of the second album, which is why it's different. But I think that he, I don't know. I feel like that was his main instrument to start with, and he may have had other guitars. He obviously also had other guitars. I think the thing about the difference, I think what you see is the growth of Led Zeppelin. Actually, I think, as you said, the first album is very straight ahead, very play. These are blues songs, knock them out 9 days. The second album has elements of folk already coming into it, doesn't it? It has Ramble On and all that stuff, which is kind of folky, that mixing of folk and blues together in a much more overt way than there is on one, which is a straight ahead blues rock record. And I think it's not that he became a better guitarist. It's just that you gain confidence because you've sold some records in the first one. 1, 2, you're able to start bringing in. If you look at Led Zeppelin records, they are, each one of them is different to the last and brings different things in. Led Zeppelin 3 is very different to Led Zeppelin 2. There's a lot more folk influences, a lot more. So I think actually what you see is Jimmy Page showing us his entire palette of what he can do, whereas the first album is just a small part of it.
I think probably also the first album would have been just like a bunch of guys that didn't know each other too well in a recording aspect. And they said, here's a few kind of covers, here's a few kind of modifications of some blues standards. Here's a couple of originals. But the second album, they would have got to know each other through the touring, and they would probably all added their own little touches together. How about this? How about I do this? How about I do this? Like you said, the word growth, confidence.
I just want to to relay to you guys a couple of comments in the chat, if that's okay at this stage. So Gussie's saying, didn't Page fund the first album? So we spoke about that they paid for that themselves, didn't they?
Well, he did, yeah.
And Gussie's saying that Zepp played the Masonic Temple in 1969 in Toronto. So did you see them, Gussie? Another interesting point here, that Terry Reid might have been in the band because he had a touring contract, so he couldn't be the lead singer, who was the original choice for Jimmy Page.
Yeah.
And I'll be honest with you, I what's Terry Reid famous for?
Nothing very much. Terry Reid is famous for giving his Telecaster to Joe Bonamassa.
Heard the name mentioned.
And what else? So we've got Mitch Harmon. G'day, Mitch. So I just want to do a couple of shout out guys. We've got Gussie, Mitch Harmon, Mark Dillon. I don't think we've had Mark in the chat before, so g'day, Mark.
Hi, Mark. Yeah.
Yeah, it's always good to catch up. We've got Todd Flowers. G'day, Todd.
Hi, Todd.
Always cool to catch up with Todd. So Gussie, no, Gussie didn't see them. And Page liked Reid over Plant. Yeah, I have heard that. But is there anything that we can go and listen to hear this Reid guy? Is there anything available?
Oh, he's had albums out. Yeah, Terry Reid. Yeah.
Oh, okay.
So they're up there. You can go back and listen to them. Yeah.
Okay, all right. I'll
get a sense of it.
I'd like to check that out.
I think confusingly, there are two Terry Reids, by the way.
Because I've heard the word Terry Reid thrown around. So is there another Terry Reid?
Yeah, there is another Terry Reid. There's a kind of more of a Terry Reid. What do I say? I have to look because I can't remember. But yeah, there's another Terry. If you go and listen to an album called Rainbow in Curved Air, that is not the Terry Reid. You'll be going, really? What, this Led Zeppelin? Don't get it at all because it's not the same one. But
So Led Zeppelin 2 had 400,000 registered advance sales. So that's on the back of them touring the States, obviously, with Led Zeppelin 1. That's how much of an influence or impact they had.
Completely, yeah.
And let's face it, it's young man's music, it's driving in the car music, it's party music. I mean, I can't tell you how many 12-year-olds I see to this day that are wearing those Led Zeppelin Swan Song T-shirts. You know, it's just...
yeah. That's really interesting, that, isn't it?
You know, I was told you work at that bakery a little bit, and they play Led Zeppelin a bit, and I got to say, when I was a kid, and I said, let's play Stairway to Heaven to my dad and all his friends, they no, they'd heard it a million times. But after not listening to it for 10 years and then hearing that guitar solo, it's just magical.
I think
that I think Jimmy loved his telly, and I think that was part of his rockabilly side. But I think
rock and roll side,
his signature sound came from that Les Paul. I think the variety he could do with the I guess the thickness of the tone. He loved his reverb. He loved his he liked his wah wah a bit. It just all amalgamated. And the Marshall amps, obviously, he was a Marshall guy, wasn't he?
Yeah, to start with. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I think you're absolutely right about it. If there's only 3 instrumentalists in your group and you're playing, arenas or whatever, 10,000 people. Then you actually want that thicker sound, don't you? You want a bit, because the one thing you've got is in the 3 pieces, lots of space in which to play your guitar. It's got to be a big sound, doesn't it?
Because what he would have done on that first album is he probably would have had a 40 or a 50 watt amp in his telly. They would have mic'd it up in a very small room and created a very large sound, but you can't do that in a arena.
My memory of that first time, didn't he use a little 15-watt Supro amp?
Mm.
And then mic'd it kind of close and not so close. My memory of that is that's what he used. He used the telly, but this little amp to get this kind of this sound. And then obviously later
overdriven would have been the word, eh? You got this very intense overdriven sound, but you can't recreate that in live arenas. So then he would have had to adjust to a Les Paul.
And certainly not with a telly and Marshalls. You wouldn't get that really big overdriven sound, did you? Because Marshalls don't. You crank them up, but they don't do that kind of really, unless you've got the humbuckers, then you've got a different thing completely.
I think
it makes
that goes
sense, doesn't it? The bigger the venues they played, the more of a guitar you needed to fill up the space in those venues.
I think it goes back to what you were saying earlier before, Simon, that he learned a lot about recording techniques. Clapton had to take a 50-watt amp, Marshall in, and turn that up really loud to record the Beano album. So obviously Jimmy Page realised, well, look, if I took a smaller amp and turned it up, well, then I'm going to get that breakup without deafening everybody, and we can all contribute to making this album really fast and get out and start making some cash.
Yeah, completely. Yeah. I think they started making cash quite quickly on those American tours. I think they started off at about $1,500 when they started in December '68, and then by summer of '69 they were on $30,000 a gig.
Wow.
Not bad in 7 or 8 months to go from that sort of thing. But the other interesting thing about that first album, I think, is that having recorded themselves pretty cheaply, 9 days, they then went round and got advances to the record companies. But their major thing was they retained all the rights and complete autonomy over their career. They didn't sign up. they licensed those records to Atlantic. They didn't, Atlantic didn't own them like most people. And I think that, so they obviously retained control of those from the word go and forever. And I think that's a very clever move to be able to do that. And I think, so they retained autonomy down to what they released as singles, what they didn't release as singles, when they went on tour, when they did albums, all those things that in the sort of late 60s, to be honest, were probably completely different to every other band who would have been dictated to by their record company when they recorded stuff and things like that, And with Led Zeppelin, not a bit of it. The new model where the artist dictates what they do.
Smart guys. Was that the manager's influence on making that happen?
I presume it's Page and Grant together. I imagine Page, obviously, and John Paul Jones as well. Let's not leave him out. Had, very much that kind of, seen the business from the inside, been in it for 5 or 6 years, got a really good idea. Peter Grant being a manager, before them, you get an idea about what you can do and, save up a bit of money. We'll do it differently. We can do this differently. There's a different business model to the one that, where you go and you're sign up to a record company and you're... Cats are no respect.
I've been hanging out to ask this question, because we're all guitar players and most of the cats in the chat are guitar players. And I think I asked Carl this a couple of shows ago. When you think of Jimmy Page, do you think of Telecaster or Les Paul, Simon?
No, I think you think Les Paul. I mean, completely. I went to see him in 1975. Les Paul, and Martin, whatever he had to do the acoustic stuff. But no, complete and the double neck. But yeah, it's completely synonymous with a Les Paul. And that's fine.
I mean, looking back, obviously Eric Clapton was the instigator with that Les Paul Marshall sound, but Jimmy Page carried it through to the 70s, and I think he was basically the poster child for that Les Paul Marshall sound in the end.
Yes,
because of Joe Perry, Aerosmith / Guns N' Roses. It just became
Eddie Van Halen.
Yeah. A
completely
signature rock blues sound,
Yes,
Jimmy Page, I don't like using this word, but he was just considered a guitar god. I mean, it's 70s. I mean, those huge tours. I mean, he was just untouchable.
So this Telecaster, signature Telecaster that Fender are bringing out, it's just a cash grab, isn't it?
Dude, I have a different view than that. I think what's the difference between that and the Eddie Van Halen guitars that came out 6 months ago? The ones where they made 5 of them and they were $50,000 or whatever they were. And I don't feel as though an Eddie Van Halen continues to make signature models of all his guitars. It's fine. I think it's completely fine, and I think it's completely fine if Fender and Jimmy Page decide they want to do. I mean, I think they want to do this sort of signature model that's going to be very expensive, but they're also going to do a Mexican one. I understand, which I think puts it in the realms of most of us to play, and those Mexicans will be decent quality and stuff like that. I don't feel as though it's any more of a cash grab than anybody else who does a signature model like that.
Is there a signature Les Paul? Jimmy Page Les Paul?
Yeah. I don't know if there's one now, but he's done one in the past. I mean, interestingly, Jimmy Page's signature Les Paul has all manner of electronic wizardry in it to do things. It has kind of push pulls, doesn't it? Yeah.
Because obviously, I mean, we forgot to mention, I guess, in a way, Peter Green, in a sense, he was a Les Paul guy, and he obviously had his own tone. But did Jimmy Page customise his Les Pauls at all?
Yeah, they were quite. Yeah, certainly later they were quite heavily customised, weren't they? And I haven't got any details of them to hand, but yeah, they were. That's quite funny if you think about those. Those quite heavily. I don't think they might even had alternative tuning stuff in them. I have a memory of that. I'm not entirely certain that's true, but when you think about the fuss over the robotic tuners and all of that, it's quite amusing that the Jimmy Page certainly had more than the standard, they did more than just a 2 volumes and 2 tones kind of thing. There was certainly switching and stuff going on in that as well.
When did the Dan Electros come in?
Later, kind of, I think around sort of, I think isn't Kashmir's done on a Dan Electro?
Okay.
I think so. Yeah, later on he started playing those, started broadening out what he used. I mean, it's typical within keeping with what we've been talking about with Jimmy Page. Started off very tight and gradually broadened his palette out, and he broadened his palette out in terms of sounds, the type of music he played, and then the guitars he used. Certainly with, and I think that's, if you go later on, post Led Zeppelin stuff, he used other stuff completely.
Black Telly. He used a Black Telly and there's the Outriders or the Firm or whatever it's called.
Yeah.
But yeah, to answer your question, when I think of Jimmy Page, the first thing I think of is that black suit with the black
dragons
piece with the sparkly colours and the and the Les Paul and the Marshall amp and the Zoso and all that sort of stuff. And then when I think of him as well, I think of him with that double-necked red SG.
Yeah.
Which
that's the other one, isn't it?
Doing that? Who had anyone else done that prior in rock? Bring out something like that?
No. Well, I think that was just circumstance, wasn't it? He needed a guitar that he could do Stairway on. Yes. And it's like he needed a 12 and a 6 string together. So it kind of
he wasn't the biggest guy either. He would have
no. Well, you'll notice he wasn't playing it on lots of numbers, was he? He's playing it on one. That's enough weightlifting for tonight, lads. I think we'll get that. Les Paul's not that light, but I imagine that's, I don't know, 16, 17, 18 pounds. It must be bloody heavy.
So essentially it's 2 guitars.
Yeah.
It's a lot of weight. 2 necks, big body.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a lot of weight. If they're both, even if they're both only 8 pounds, you're losing a bit for, still to 16. God, that's a heavy guitar. Yeah, no wonder any ever played it on one number.
But
you wouldn't want to do more.
Back to that first album, Led Zeppelin would have been clever enough to realise that most bands, Beatles, the Stones, Yardbirds to a degree, Dr. Feelgood, their first album comes out where they basically come out the gate bolting, energy, primitive.
The other thing about them, Carl, is that all of those bands you made, all of them, they all made their first albums are basically cover albums, aren't they? The first Rolling Stones album, the first Beatles album, has got loads of covers on, So in effect, it's from that time, it's a completely standard modus operandi. So the first album is like, we'll do covers.
Was that their set, though? Is that what their set was at that stage, though, Simon? A covers set?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Train kept a rolling and all of that stuff. Yeah, pretty much. All they're all written by other people and not by Led Zeppelin. I was looking at the money. Absolutely, all covers. But as I say, to me, that's completely standard modus operandi for the '60s, isn't it? For lots of bands.
From just a survival point of view, your first album would have to be primarily covers to get a foot in the door. I mean, it'd be pretty ballsy to have an album full of originals. I don't know many bands that have done that.
No, interesting. You're right. Not in the '60s, did they? Not in the '60s. We're talking about the '60s. Most of it was. Yeah, that's a really interesting point. Most of it was cover. You get to the '70s, and then you actually people from the that 1970 period onwards, people come through then, all their own stuff. Completely, because they paved the way. But you're right; those those bands in the '60s, all covers.
Yep.
Lots of covers, lots of, as you say, kind of saying the way to get an audience is to play what an audience knows.
Yeah.
But bring your own slant to it, and kind of just be able to then go out on tour. And when you go out and play something, the audience will recognise some of the things. Get into And I'm sure if you're Led Zeppelin, you record an album of American blues, and then you go to America and tour it. Good work. You're taking it home, so that audience, probably would have recognised most of those songs. And You Shook Me and Train Get to Rolling and all that stuff completely.
Absolutely.
That's a smart move in many ways. I'm doing it in retrospect, of course, but it feels like a pretty smart move to do that. And it feels like a good way of breaking a band, getting an audience, and then the second album, you do more of your original stuff.
Yep.
Based on based on some stuff, but more of your original stuff. Bring more of yourself into the band because you've got an audience already.
Yep.
And
what you do is you feel out what the audience likes, and that the audience is always going to go back to maybe one of their first original kind of catchy songs, and you'll always kind of put, like the Stones would do Route 66, just let them,
Do you know what, Carl? On a completely different, this is to make you laugh. Me and my friend Dave, who do gigs together, we started doing Route 66, right? So I'm just learning the solo and mucking about with it the other day. And I put it on. I've obviously heard it hundreds of times, but I put it on to play along, right? And what's hilarious about it, halfway through the verse, it speeds up by about 20%.
This is Stones
and this is visible kind of, the Stones version. It accelerates in halfway through the first verse. It starts off, it's like somebody in the country has gone like that, wind up, guys. And if you go listen to it with your guitar on and and you go, how fast is it? What?
Yeah, because
it's really funny
that it's played. It's supposed to be an A, but it's played A sharp.
Yeah, I think it's it might be a bit sharp, but it is funny how when you go to play along with it, how noticeably it speeds up halfway through the first verse. You never get the record doing that now. That's just a marvelous. Maybe I'd stop and laugh. Sorry, that's a bit of an aside, but I did when I saw it, I thought of you. I thought I'm going to tell the guys that because it's very funny. The old days when it didn't matter if you sped up by 20%.
So that's
all about the energy of it.
That second album, Simon and Carl. 69. It outsold Abbey Road and Let It Bleed.
Wow.
Yeah, went on to sell 3 million copies. So sometimes we forget that as guitar players and British blues fans, you hold on one hand Abbey Road. That's an important album, and Let It Bleed. But sometimes we forget actually how important Led Zeppelin was for a lot of young cats.
And they were smart enough, like most bands. I mean, the Stones, we talked about this previous shows, that I think every album had a hit song. And every great tour they did, where they would have toured against an album.
Well, can I just read out the song list on Led Zeppelin 2? Whole Lot of Love, What Is and What Should Never Be, The Lemon Song, Thank You, Heartbreaker, Living, Loving, Made, Ramble On, Moby Dick, and Bring It On Home. Every song is fantastic.
Yep.
And a drum solo as well.
Yeah.
Moby Dick.
Yeah.
Outstanding.
Yep.
And you've even got Plant playing harmonica.
Train Get to Rolling stuff. Yeah. Interestingly, only 8 tracks.
Mm.
No, it's kind of 73 minutes, 15 tracks malarkey and all of that. 8 tracks, 4 aside, 20 minutes, bang, done. And I think that's that's something of note as well. That it was kept pretty tight, kept pretty focused, kept pretty organised. Even because obviously they were going around and recording in quite a lot with. Didn't they record it with Eddie Kramer in quite a lot of that would keep flying and recording? But I think that's as I say, broadening the palette, but still only 8 songs, still not going mad kind of thing.
For our Canadian friends, they'll be happy to hear this. So it was recorded at various locations: New York, LA, London, and Vancouver.
Wow.
Yeah, obviously flying around and gigging and just booking into recording studios and doing it between tour dates and stuff, whilst they ran about and ran amok.
Jerry Wexler and Ahmet Ergen, they loved Led Zeppelin because signed to Atlantic Records, selling massive units.
It's interesting that they had a whole new
units.
kind of that Atlantic thing. That we were obviously very in R&B, very R&B kind of label. And then they started signing Led Zeppelin and didn't they? Iron Butterfly, they were on, and Vanilla Fudge, they were on Atlantic, I think, as well. We moved very much into that kind of heavier blues rock kind of thing, as he saw the business.
And then we find out as their career continued. Led Zeppelin 3, Led Zeppelin 4, they got very folky, very, very English.
See? So, even Ramble On has got that kind of, acoustic. It's got the juxtaposition between the sort of, that rundown that he does, a bit like a Stairway to Heaven rundown, and then, that bit, the so heavier guitar bit, so you're already getting that. And then obviously Led Zeppelin 3, where they go off to Wales and commune in a...
They probably realised, like the Rolling Stones, that, as great as the first two albums are, they can't keep doing that.
No.
So when they started figuring out acoustics and mandolins and different tunings and a bit of Robert Johnson and slide, they just became just a heavyweight band. Almost a band to compare yourself to if you wanted to learn songs. Like, how the hell did he do that? Or,
completely, yeah. It's and I think you're right. It's that thing about broadening your palette. You do some things like Led Zeppelin 3 opens with the Immigrant Song. That heavy kind of okay, we're in reasonably familiar Led Zeppelin territory, but very quickly starts going off into that kind of English folky thing, and not even blues really, but English folk and kind of and obviously
I love it.
It's really cool.
What I like about the guys is they a lot of people can hide in the studio, but they actually took a lot of their folk songs, played them live. They tried to play them live, and you don't quite have the luxury of hiding in the studio and having the acoustics and some of the microphone dampening and that, but they still pulled it off pretty well.
Yeah, indeed,
Battle of Evermore and stuff like that, that's hard to play.
Yeah. But, they pull it off with consummate ease. And I think I saw them in 1975, and it, that whole section in the middle where they just, sit down, John Bonham comes out from behind his drum kit, gets a bodhran or whatever that, and kind of, and they sit the four of them on stools at the front and play three or four acoustic songs. Really
it's hard
good
to remember something 43 years ago, but from what you can remember, talk to me about. Obviously we've all listened to the records, but how do they sound live? They sound even more intense or similar to the record, or?
Oh no, but very similar to the record. Yeah,
oh, wow.
I think but I think that is a tribute to the way that they recorded lots of their stuff, even going in, later on, that basic thing of the basic track of, the three-piece, the three instrumentalists, go in, set up in a studio, facing each other, 1, 2, 3, 4, off you go.
Yeah.
And I think that they never lost that basic play in the studio. The basic track would get played in the studio. Now, obviously, later on, when Jimmy Page was doing Presence and all of that stuff and doing Achilles' Last Stand, he would go in and overdub lots of different guitars and all manner of, getting that kind of, again, broadening his palette out, making a kind of guitar orchestra type thing and, all of that. And that's fine. But the basic thing is still a three-piece playing. The classic rock lineup, the three-piece. And I think that means that when you go and see them live, that's what you hear. And Page will be clever enough to go, well, there's these 2 or 3 guitar parts, but I know which one to play. Well, it's that one, I'm going to play that bit and these bits. But basically, that's what you get all the way through, which is why they're such a great live act. And if you listen to their live albums, like, How the West Was Won, or, Song Remains the Same, they sound really good, and they sound very much like the record because that's the way they recorded. Sat down and played.
I remember telling Andrew a quote when I read about an old interview. Jimmy Page said a quote. This is his quote: "I wanted artistic control and a vice grip as far as Led Zeppelin was concerned. He wanted to be the chief songwriter, arranger, producer, engineer, you name it. So their live act, would be a testimony to not only each other's capabilities, but to their professionalism. Because bands who hear the records want to see the records live. Obviously they want to see a bit of improvisation in the solos, but
improvisation, yeah.
But you don't want to see some drugged out jam fest. Not everyone's going to be dropping stuff in that show. They want to see a good show.
Yeah, and the basis of that has got to be a tight rock and roll band, which to me, Led Zeppelin were a tight rock and roll band,
And we keep forgetting about this. It's a bit like Stevie and Cream and Thunderbirds and a lot of these bands. If you take out the singer, it's just a three-piece.
Yeah, the classic lineup. Yeah, and it means that everyone's got to, you've got to be tight, all that stuff. That stuff about Jimmy Page is a very sloppy player. Jimmy Page's not a sloppy player. Jimmy Page has a lot of space to fill up and can be quite sort of loose about things, But I think there's a difference between the two. I don't think.
Have you ever read that Led Zeppelin were maybe influenced by the Doors? Because when they would have been in the Yardbirds, Doors came out in 67.
Yeah, I don't. They probably. I would say that they might have been slightly influenced by the same things. That kind of West Coast sound. Because I did read somewhere that the first song that Robert Plant sang to Jimmy Page was the Jefferson Airplane's "White Rabbit." No, somebody to love, somebody to love. There you go. See, so you kind of, because I know that Robert Plant particularly was very interested in that kind of West Coast sound. He liked that kind of West Coast
that
stuff.
Californian sound in '67 was pretty. The Doors and the Jeffersons and
the Doors supported Led Zeppelin later.
What's that, sorry?
One of their tours. The Doors supported Led Zeppelin on one of their tours. Yeah.
It would have been an amazing show.
Peter Grant's instruction was go out and blow them all away. Because I think, good as the Doors might have been, I don't think they were as good as Led Zeppelin when it came to live. Jim Morrison not quite as disciplined as Robert Plant, possibly. It's only a rumour, but
because the Doors once again are just a three-piece.
Yeah, see, well, without a bass player, for God's sake, as well,
Yeah.
So, when the band
I imagine when they reached their apex, which has been that Song Remains the Same after Led Zeppelin
75,
75. It would have been probably one of the best rock shows in the world to see.
It was the first ones to use kind of lasers and stuff like that. When Jimmy Page was doing Dazed and Confused, he had the lasers,
lights
going out. Laser lights. Yeah. But it's very early. I presume. I think the Who might have used them before that. But yeah, amazing kind of. And obviously, and that's a really interesting point about that. Have you got DVD? The Led Zeppelin 4 is it just called DVD with the red butte on the front.
No.
Have you seen that? It's a fascinating document because that one. Yes, there we are. If you watch the first concert on that is from the Albert Hall in 1969.
1970.
1970, is it 1970?
Yeah.
But Andrew, you remember what they're dressed in? Jimmy Page is dressed in this kind of diamond golfing jumper, isn't he?
Yeah.
Looks like a man just come playing golf.
Yeah.
And the stage is completely bare, and there's nothing there. There's no.
It's phenomenal.
They just go on and play, don't they? Which is great. But and then you move up. A few years later, and he's got the dragon suit and and all that stuff, and the lights and the whole backdrop and things. Yeah, completely different sort of thing. But even in, as you say, 1970, they very plain sort of stage set.
The fact that,
really funny.
when you watch that famous DVD, Song Remains the Same, and they've got the scalpers and people selling memorabilia, but I think Peter Grant might have been influential in creating a marketing image too, possibly. Like,
oh, completely. You know, there's that whole thing about, you know, they never did press interviews, they never did television, they never released singles, you know, except for A Whole Lot of Love. They released A Whole Lot of Love as a single, but you know, pretty much not released singles. Didn't do any press interviews, didn't, you know, when they talked, you know, that tremendous kind of mystique, and there was a tremendous mystique about it. I think you can, you know, I mean, I'm old enough to remember that, you know, I'm old enough to remember, and I've said this before, maybe on your guys, you know, that you would see bands, and you wouldn't even know what they looked like, and you wouldn't know, you know, you possibly wouldn't know how to pronounce their name even, you know. You know, I've said this story on a couple of things, but you know, when Bob Dylan, there was a journalist in England called David Hepworth who's written couple of really good books on rock music, but he's brought up in the north of England in the 60s, and for 6 months he thought Bob Dylan was called Bob Dylan, Dylan. He thought it was because they never heard it, they never heard his name pronounced. All they had were these blooming records that said Dylan, so they pronounced it Bob Dylan. You know, and I think, but you know, but it's just that is an example of the difference between now, where you know Wikipedia, everybody, you know, you can see that you can work out somebody pronounce somebody's name straight away. Then all that mystique built up, and Peter Grant was brilliant at that. We know with Jimmy Page, and I'm sure they did a lot of colluding together about how they wouldn't do all this stuff, they wouldn't do what other bands did, you know.
It's
and they would
interesting
go
that you
out
should
and
say
they
that,
would
Simon,
play.
because but my first exposure to Led Zeppelin was in 1980. I went to my nana's place, and one of my cousins had come back from Singapore with his family. My uncle had been stationed over there through the New Zealand Navy, and he'd served a 2-year posting. Anyway, my cousin Carl came back with The Song Remains the Same album. Cassette.
So
cassette, double cassette. So I remember, you know, we were crashing in a room, and we had a packet of Rothmans, and I was probably 13 years before, so we're smoking Rothmans, listening to
so cool.
to Led Zeppelin, and it blew me away. And I remember talking to my cousin Carl, saying, "Who is this?" You know, and he said, "Oh, he's pretty good. It's a guy called Led Zeppelin."
A guy called Led Zeppelin. See what I mean? Precisely, a guy called Led Zeppelin. Yeah.
It wasn't a band; it was a guy.
Yeah. Do you know? I went to see The Song Remains the Same at the cinema. It was at a cinema release, because the only way you could go and see it, because pre-DVDs, you know, the only way you could go and see it was to go to the cinema to go and see it. And we went to see it. You know, marvelled at the you know, each member having their own bits that they did. In the days when you could.
But that was actually a masterpiece in the sense that that particular there would have been a lot of behind the scenes work gone onto that DVD, Song Remains the Same, in that cinema in the mid 70s. You know, with the show and the documentary and a little bit of the behind the band, the mystique, and the climbing up the mountain and the wizardry and the, you know.
Well, it all ties in with Jimmy Page's, you know, obviously his interest in Aleister Crowley and the sort of mysticism and the magic stuff.
I love that film. I love that film because for a long time that's all we had of the band, didn't we? Until we were lucky enough to get hold of this of this DVD. So,
which is fantastic. I mean, some Earl's Court is on there. The gigs I went to are on there on that thing. You can see, fantastic. You know, yeah. But do you know? I've said this on. Yes. Do you know how much the tickets were? Do you know how much I paid for a ticket for that show?
It's cheap, mate. It's cheap.
Yeah.
How much?
£2.50.
Shit.
I think they were like. I think my memory, the tickets were like £1.50, £2.50. You could have gone to see Led Zeppelin for £1.50 in 1975. For God's sake. Which I think is hilarious, you know. It's just £2.50 at Earl's Court. It was just mad, you know. So cheap.
How long was the concert for? An hour and a half?
No. It's probably no support, so 3 hours.
Oh, really?
Oh yeah, by 75 they were playing 3 hours plus. Yeah. Oh God, yeah. I mean, not the longest concert I've seen, but they played 3 hours plus, 3.5 hours. I mean, How the West Was Won is kind. I don't know if have you got How the West Was Won?
Yes, I have.
Triple CD,
Yes.
and that's
So that's all
on for
one
3
gig,
hours.
eh?
The How the West Was Won is not. It's 2 gigs, but yeah,
2 gigs.
kind of joined together. But I think they chose between the two, and that sort of LA Forum and somewhere else. But yeah, pretty much. Yeah, they play 3 hours. They had material and they had stuff. And they do a. I mean, but the thing is, that Moby Dick is half an hour. At Earl's Court, Moby Dick is half an hour on its own. Dazed and Confused is half an hour on its own. So
Wow.
2 songs is a whole hour. God. Yeah. They went in. With John Bonham playing Moby Dick. 20. Half an hour on his own, starting off with his hands. And kind of just playing the whole drum kit, but with his hands. Starting off, and then getting into sticks and stuff, and and gradually doing what he does. Building it up, building and building and building, and this tremendous kind of thing. But yeah, that's half an hour.
So when the parents
Those were the days.
When the parents picked up the children from the show, and the parents said, "What was the show like?" We've got my money's worth, Mum. 3 hours.
I got your money's worth. Yeah, 3 hours. Yeah. Actually, well, I lived in Bristol then, so I was staying with my cousin in London. So my mum and dad didn't come and pick me up. I did get on with my own life.
3 hours. That's wow.
Yeah,
what a benchmark.
3 hours plus. Yeah.
What a benchmark. Because it's a shame now, because most shows, most bands, it's all, even movies, everything is automated,
hour and a half,
predictable, just pathetic. Yeah, they do
a
forced encore. They have to do an encore.
Yeah, and all of that. Yeah, this wasn't like that at all.
So that's a newfound respect, I guess, for Led Zeppelin is that they gave you a show.
Oh God, yeah. The only person I've seen who plays longer than that is Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen, 1981, Wembley Arena, 4 hours.
Wow.
8 o'clock till 12:15 with a 15-minute break.
So in other words, you heard every single song on every single album up to that point.
Yeah, played them all. Well, well, some of the elongated stories and stuff, but 4 hours.
The guy I feel sorry for on that band's the new bass player that started the day before. How's he learn all those songs?
Just play along, you'll be fine.
Yeah. He's only the bass player.
Yeah, didn't he? Yeah, no one will notice. They will, but it's a fantastic kind of piece of madness, really. But yeah. So if you want to get your money's worth, go and see Bruce Springsteen. He still does 3 hours plus now. And he's, 69?
He looks great.
Get in. Yeah, I'm really looking forward to his Springsteen on Broadway thing on Netflix. That'd be really cool.
Yeah.
That's going to be shown live on Netflix, and they're releasing it as an album. So,
speaking of theatrical and Broadways and musicals, do you think Brian May was influenced by Jimmy Page? I think so.
I think most people of that age were influenced by Jimmy Page.
Yeah.
As one of the that those great guitarists from the 60s, so Clapton, Peter Green, Page, Beck, those guys, Keith Richards, they all influenced the next people coming through.
Yeah,
for certain, completely. Why wouldn't you? Why wouldn't Keith Richards influence you? Why wouldn't Jimmy Page influence you? With the breadth of the things he played, the different areas he inhabited, Clapton the same, a great blues, but Jeff Beck, Mister, doing stuff that nobody else was doing on guitars, all that kind of, with his, the volume stuff and the different ways of. I mean, those guys, innovated, in a tremendous way.
When did Bohemian Rhapsody come out?
Oh, Bohemian Rhapsody's 75, 74.
And when did Stairway to Heaven come out?
71.
Oh, 71.
Okay.
Led Zeppelin
So
4.
Led Zeppelin kind of started that rock, not necessarily opera, but that theatrical kind of breaking up of a bridge and a melody and a song and a solo and a story. And
Oh, I think, yeah. Well, I mean, I think that we shouldn't underestimate. Lots of bands were probably doing that stuff then. By 1971. I mean, 71. You had, Yes, doing the Yes album and stuff like that, which is, quite long tracks. They're kind of very complicated, and
And the Canterbury sound still had a lot of influence on some of these guys too, Simon.
Oh, Caravan and Matching Mole and all of that. Yeah.
Yeah, they were all
Robert
feeding
Dwight.
off each other and linking into, the Battle of Evermore is
Sandy Denny.
It touches into that kind of
Fairport Convention.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, and also, of course, Jimmy Page had a long association with Roy Harper. Do you know who Roy Harper is? Sort of the English folk singer, pretty much. So I saw Roy Harper playing a free concert in Hyde Park once with Jimmy Page. No, with David Gilmour on guitar, John Paul Jones on bass, and Edgar Broughton on drums. I think it was Edgar Broughton, maybe Steve Broughton, but yeah, in a free concert. It's great, So I think that that interlocking of all those styles and all those different people, and that scene, especially in the 60s, I think probably wasn't that big, and they bumped into each other. They knew each other, Beck and Page played together in the Yardbirds, and before, they all knew each other. So you get influence, and then the guys coming through, they make all these great records, and the guys coming through, coming through into the 70s, are influenced by those guys because, they're at the top of their game. They're the people you look up to.
Well, what's interesting, though, about that whole sound and that era that we're talking about, the Canterbury sound and Led Zeppelin, and we're not surprised by it, obviously, because, again, this is one of the reasons why I first heard about Tolkien was through, listening to Led Zeppelin. So you get a copy of the Lord of the Rings and you flick through the Lord of the Rings and you try and battle when you're 14 years old trying to read Lord of the Rings, and you're trying to find what's in this book that's like really, really important because it inspires Led Zeppelin. So you battle through it. But if you have a look at what these bands were doing in the 70s and then see what, and this is off on a tangent, and you see what Peter Jackson did with Lord of the Rings, they were 30 years ahead. That whole imagery, that you listen to is presented on the movie screen, in my opinion.
Yeah. Oh, I understand. Yeah. There's links, isn't there? Links through. You can follow the threads through into.
Robert Plant had that lyric from the depths of Mordor.
Yeah,
that's right. Yeah.
I met a girl so fair.
Yep.
Yeah. But they both link into that kind of English folk, English kind of legends, mythology things, doesn't it? I mean, Tolkien's very into that, and that's what Lord of the Rings has as its basis.
It's centuries and centuries old because you got druids and spells and potions and Stonehenge and wars and the immigrant song and Valhalla and the Celtics and the Vikings and the Romans and the Saxons and a lot of stuff.
What if one thing, certainly the members of Led Zeppelin were good students of history.
I was going to say they were being very well read.
Yeah, clearly. Art students.
Yeah, art students. Jimmy Page certainly had, and I think that, that the Jimmy Page interest in, mysticism, Aleister Crowley and all of that stuff, that feeds in very strongly into that.
Simon. Do what thou wilt.
Yes, do what thou wilt.
The whole of the law.
Is the whole of the law. Yes, indeed. Look at that. It's taken us an hour and a half to get to Aleister Crowley.
Yeah. That's a subject
with a K kind of thing.
Is Jimmy Page's dabblings into the dark side.
The mystics. Yeah. Yeah.
I didn't realise that Alistair Crowley's house was all the way in Scotland on the Loch Ness.
Yeah. The shores of Loch Ness or something. Yeah. Very
Robert,
desolate place.
This is John. Where the hell's Jimmy? Oh, he's driving from bloody Scotland. It's really late.
Yeah, about 3 days late. Yes.
We're supposed to be recording in London.
Yeah. Where is he?
Why
No idea.
There?
Well, Alistair used to hang out with the Loch Ness Monster, so they used to get up to mischief together.
I think he was the Lost Ness Monster, to be honest.
That third album was recorded in a famous house, wasn't it?
Bron-y-Awr, yes. They not recorded, but they went there to this cottage in North Wales to kind of write, get off the sort of touring train a bit and relax and kind of write and stuff. Hence the much more kind of pastoral folk kind of influence to it.
It's quite interesting because a lot of those British bands did that. The Fleetwood Mac with Kiln House, Black Sabbath with that. They went to a house. So it's quite interesting.
Traffic. They went off and to the countryside, didn't they? And they used to play in a country house kind of thing, where they sat and relaxed with wine and some smoke, some jazz cigarettes. I think is the terminology, isn't it? Hello. So who's being phoned?
Yeah, me.
Are they after you, Andrew?
Hey, well, look. Anyway, it's we've been going for a while. Anyway, guys, it's 8 o'clock here.
7:02. It's time I went and got my children up for school.
Okay. So before we knock off, if we can finish this discussion next week, I'd be cool if it's okay with you guys.
Yeah, I've got a couple of things before we go. A couple of just a little addendums to what we've been talking about. I have three personal connections to Led Zeppelin. One is that my dad, when he was alive, one of the things he did was he made this little company which sells this thing called Soundbeam, and they have 3 or 4 people who administer this, and the part-time administrator for it is John Paul Jones's daughter, Cindy. So which is really nice. But and also my dad again, being the composer, he had an electronics performance group, and it was about 74, when I was at university. His performance group was called Uncle Jambo's Pendular Vibration. Anyway, only out of my dad's imagination. So he used to be basically live musicians would manipulate their sound through kind of a set of electronic boxes, including a synthesizer called a VCS3, which was on Pink Floyd's Dark Side of the Moon, all that stuff. So he went to this the Huddersfield Music Festival, right? This is in '84, right? With a bloke called Tony Robinson. Does the name Tony Robinson mean anything to you? Blackadder.
Oh yeah.
Blackadder. Well, him and John Paul Jones. And we went and did these workshops and kind of electronic music.
Simon, did you borrow Jimmy Page's phase or reverb or auto delay? Because I can hear you twice.
Yes. I don't know what that's about. I have no idea what. Is it me? No, it's not me because I can hear the echo. So I'm blaming Andrew.
That's good. That's good.
Yeah, but there's one other story as well. My greatest musical experience, one of them, has been standing in my mum and dad's sitting room with John Paul Jones and him showing me how to play Black Dog.
Wow!
How it works. Because he wrote it, and when he went to the studio, and he said, basically, it starts off in time, it then goes out of time, and then back in time. And they had to work out how to play it.
You're going to have to talk about this next week, Simon, a little bit more. You can't,
They are tantalised.
Yeah.
What's quite neat, I guess, is we've touched on the Yardbirds, the new Yardbirds, the formation of Led Zeppelin, the rawness, the second album, the third album. I guess next week we could talk about that middle great period, the fourth album, the Untitled.
Yes.
Yeah, 4, 5, and 6. Yeah.
And then
Yes.
the tour that they did with that, and then the later albums.
Yeah. I'm amazed, Simon. I want to hear more about this this lesson. So
because that Black Dog bass line is exactly like Jimmy Page's guitar line. Those guys are pretty
Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. Completely.
Hey, I'm going to knock off, guys. I'm going to say shout out to the guys in the chat, if that's okay. Jimmy T.
Yeah.
Mr. BHP.
Yeah. Take care, guys, in the chat.
Arvin.
Yeah.
Gussie Wells. Gussie. Mitch.
Yeah.
And I think that's all. Jim Goodry, thank you for joining us. So you guys have to come back next week to listen to Simon telling us more about this lesson.
Same time next week.
Same time next week.
5:30.
Okay, I'm going to knock the broadcast off, guys. If you guys want to say goodbye.
Hey, good
Yes,
to see you,
thanks
Simon.
everybody in the chat. Take care.
Take care,
guys.
and get some rest.